My name is Simone. I am 35 years old, and I am the founder and chief executive officer of a specialized, nationally distributed botanical skincare corporation. My entire profession is dedicated to the science of formulation and the absolute, unforgiving mathematics of scaling a product. I spend my days analyzing supply chains, stabilizing organic compounds, and calculating the exact profit margins required to move a product from a kitchen counter to the shelves of 2,000 retail stores. In business scaling, you learn a fundamental truth about human perception. People will always mock the foundation while you are digging the dirt, and they will only respect the building once they cannot afford to buy a room inside of it. So, when I sat at the center of my in-laws' heavy mahogany dining table on a cold Sunday evening in late November, cutting my roasted chicken while they openly mocked my intelligence for the 100th time, I did not cry. I did not throw down my napkin. I did not beg my husband to defend me. I simply took a slow sip of my sparkling water, smiled a polite, vacant smile, and listened to my father-in-law boast about my husband's recent, mediocre corporate bonus. My husband, Marcus, sat across from me, soaking in the praise of his parents. He believed that he was the absolute financial pillar of our marriage. He believed that my 8 years of grueling, relentless work building my company was nothing more than a cute, unprofitable hobby that barely kept me occupied. He believed that the financial dynamic of our household was heavily, permanently skewed in his favor, giving him the right to treat me like a subordinate. He was wrong. He was catastrophically, mathematically wrong. He did not know that less than 48 hours prior to this dinner, my corporate bank account had received a direct wire transfer from a massive national cosmetics retailer. He did not know that the single purchase order I had just fulfilled was worth more than his entire lifetime of corporate salaries combined. And he did not know that tonight was the last night I would ever sit at this table and allow his family to treat me like a punchline. Welcome back to Family Drama Files, where we tell quiet, true-to-life stories about deep betrayal, methodical justice, and the exact moment someone stops shrinking to accommodate the toxic, cowardly people in their lives. If you have ever been treated like a failure by a family obsessed with status, or if you have ever played the long game to build an empire in absolute silence, this story is for you. Drop a comment below to let me know where you are listening from, and be sure to subscribe. To understand the absolute, staggering arrogance of what Marcus and his family did at that dining table, you have to understand the toxic corporate worship of my in-laws and the financial betrayal that formed the foundation of my marriage. I met Marcus when we were both 25 years old. He was a junior executive at a massive, soulless insurance conglomerate. He was handsome, driven, and obsessed with the traditional markers of success. His parents, Richard and Eleanor, were the exact same breed of corporate socialites. Richard was a senior vice president at a regional bank, a man who measured human worth entirely by job titles, stock options, and the prestige of the logo on a business card. Eleanor was a woman who treated casual conversation like a competitive sport, constantly fishing for information she could use to elevate her own status. When Marcus and I first started dating, I was working a miserable, soul-crushing desk job in corporate marketing. In their eyes, I was acceptable. I had a standard salary, health benefits, and a recognizable corporate master. But when I turned 27, 2 years into our relationship, I reached my breaking point. I had always harbored a deep, obsessive passion for dermatology and botanical chemistry. I suffered from severe skin issues in my early 20s, and after finding no relief in commercial products, I had started formulating my own serums and moisturizers. I spent thousands of hours reading medical journals, sourcing raw organic compounds, and perfecting my formulas. I decided to quit my marketing job to launch my own independent skincare brand. When I told Marcus, his reaction was not supportive. It was sheer, unadulterated panic. "Simone, you cannot just quit a stable job to make lotion in our kitchen," Marcus argued, pacing across our small apartment. "That is insane. What about your retirement contributions? What about your health insurance? You are throwing away a real career for a craft fair hobby." "It is not a hobby, Marcus," I explained calmly, holding up my meticulously researched business plan. "It is a gap in the market, I have the supply chain mapped out. I have the branding. I just need time to build the inventory and the e-commerce platform." Marcus looked at me as if I had just announced I was joining a cult. When we got married a year later, my business was still in its infancy. I was working 80-hour weeks, blending formulas, packaging boxes by hand, and managing social media campaigns. The revenue was small, but it was growing steadily. However, my lack of an immediate, massive corporate salary terrified Marcus. He was so deeply indoctrinated by his parents' worldview that he viewed entrepreneurship as unemployed delusion. 1 month before our wedding, Marcus sat me down and presented me with a legal document. "Simone," Marcus said, unable to meet my eyes, sliding the thick packet of paper across the table. "My parents and I had a long talk. Because you are pursuing this independent venture, your income is incredibly unstable. I have worked very hard for my position at the insurance firm. I cannot risk my financial future if your business fails and you accumulate debt." It was a post-nuptial agreement. It explicitly mandated that our finances would remain entirely, legally separate. We would maintain one joint checking account for household bills, into which we would deposit funds proportionately based on our incomes, but our savings, our investments, and our individual debts would remain completely segregated. He was legally walling himself off from my business. It was a profound, deeply insulting display of zero faith. He was telling me, in legal jargon, that he believed I was going to fail, and he wanted to make sure the blast radius did not touch his precious corporate earnings. I looked at the contract. I looked at the man I was about to marry. Most women would have cried. They would have argued. But I am a woman who builds things. And when someone shows you exactly how little they believe in you, you do not beg them to change their mind. You sign the paper, you accept the boundary, and you use their doubt as the absolute best fuel on the market. "Fine," I said softly. I picked up a pen and signed my name. "Our money is separate. Completely." That signature set the stage for 8 years of absolute psychological warfare. Every single Sunday, attendance at Richard and Eleanor's massive suburban home for dinner was mandatory. And every single Sunday, I was subjected to a coordinated, unrelenting campaign of mockery regarding my business. In the early years, the comments were thinly veiled under fake concern. "So, Simone," Richard would boom from the head of the table, cutting his steak. "How is the little lotion hobby going? Did you sell enough soap at the farmer's market this weekend to cover your half of the electric bill?" Marcus would let out a small, embarrassed chuckle. "Dad, come on, it is an e-commerce business. She does not sell at farmers' markets." "Well, whatever it is," Eleanor would chime in, sipping her wine with a condescending smirk. "I just worry about your resume, dear. If this little experiment does not pan out, you are going to have a massive gap in your employment history. You know, the bank is hiring administrative assistants right now. Richard could put in a good word for you." I would sit there, gripping my fork under the table, my knuckles turning white. "My business is growing exactly according to my projections, Eleanor. Thank you for your concern." As the years passed, Marcus continued to climb the slow, tedious rungs of his corporate ladder. He received standard incremental promotions. A 3% raise here, a 5% raise there. Every time his salary bumped up, the Sunday dinners turned into a worship service. Richard would buy expensive champagne. Eleanor would boast about her successful son. And they would inevitably turn their gaze to me, the ultimate failure in the room, to contrast his glory. Marcus just received a $10,000 bonus, Richard announced proudly during year 4 of our marriage. "That is what happens when you commit to a real company, Simone. Stability, benefits. Not playing chemist in the garage." "It is a warehouse facility, Richard, not a garage," I corrected him quietly. "Same difference," Richard laughed loudly. What Richard, Eleanor, and Marcus did not know was that by year 4, I was no longer working out of my kitchen or a small garage. I had secured a massive, 5,000-square-foot commercial manufacturing facility. I had hired a team of 15 employees. My e-commerce platform was executing thousands of orders a day. The organic skincare market was exploding, and my highly specialized, clinically backed formulas had caught fire with major beauty influencers. Because we had signed the post-nuptial agreement, And because we filed our taxes, married filing separately, to protect Marcus's precious corporate image, my husband never saw my tax returns. He never saw my corporate balance sheets. He never asked about my revenue because he was so profoundly convinced that I was making pennies. He did not want to embarrass me by asking for the numbers. All he cared about was that I deposited my exact portion of the household expenses into the joint account on the first of every month. I always did. I never missed a payment. I decided very early on that I was not going to share my success with them. I was not going to walk into a Sunday dinner and announce my profit margins just to beg for their respect. Respect that is demanded is not real. It is just a transaction. I wanted them to continue underestimating me. I wanted to see exactly how cruel they would become when they thought I was powerless. The cruelty escalated to its absolute peak in year 8. I was 35 years old. My company had officially crossed into the stratosphere. A massive, international cosmetics retailer, a company with thousands of luxury storefronts across the globe, had approached me. They wanted to acquire the exclusive retail distribution rights to my entire skincare line. The negotiations took 6 months. I hired a team of ruthless corporate lawyers. I flew to their headquarters in New York multiple times under the guise of attending small business seminars. In late October, I signed the final contracts. The terms of the deal were staggering. I retained complete ownership of my company and my formulas, but the retailer purchased an initial, massive inventory order to stock their flagship stores for the holiday season. The upfront purchase order was for exactly $2,400,000. When the wire transfer hit my secure corporate banking account, I sat in my private office at my manufacturing facility, staring at the screen. I did not cry. I did not scream. I felt an absolute, profound sense of silence wash over me. 8 years of brutal, exhausting, terrifying work. 8 years of smiling through insults. 8 years of my husband treating me like a financial liability. And in a single day, I had generated more liquid cash than Marcus would earn in 20 years at his insurance conglomerate. The timing of the deposit could not have been more poetic. That exact same week, Marcus received devastating news at his office. The senior vice president position he had been aggressively lobbying for, the position he had bragged to his parents about for 6 months, was given to an external candidate. Marcus was passed over entirely. To add insult to injury, the company slashed the year-end bonuses. Instead of the $20,000 Marcus had anticipated, he received a meager $3,000. Marcus came home that evening completely shattered. He was angry, bitter, and lashing out at everything. "It is a rigged system," Marcus snapped, throwing his briefcase onto the kitchen counter. "I gave them 10 years of my life, 10 years, and they hand the position to some guy from outside the firm. It is completely disrespectful." I poured him a glass of water. "I am sorry, Marcus. Corporate environments can be incredibly unpredictable." He glared at me. "You do not understand, Simone. You do not understand what it is like to operate at a high-stakes corporate level. You just ship boxes from a warehouse. The pressure I am under to provide for our future is immense, especially since I am carrying the primary financial weight of this marriage." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had forced me to sign a contract to segregate our money, who was now complaining about the burden of his own choices, completely oblivious to the multi-million-dollar empire I had built while he was busy kissing his boss's shoes. "You are right, Marcus," I said, my voice completely smooth and detached. "I do not understand." "My parents want us over for dinner on Sunday," Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "I have to tell my dad I did not get the promotion. He is going to be so disappointed." I knew exactly what was going to happen at that Sunday dinner. When Marcus failed, Richard and Eleanor did not comfort him by criticizing the corporate system. They comforted him by finding someone else to look down upon. They always required a scapegoat to elevate their son's fragile ego. And for 8 years, I had been their designated punching bag. They were going to use my failing little hobby to make Marcus feel better about his corporate humiliation. They were going to spend 3 hours reminding him that even though he did not get the promotion, at least he had a real job, unlike his delusional wife. I walked into my home office. I opened my secure banking application. I took a high-definition screenshot of the cleared wire transfer from the international retailer. $2,400,000. I sent the screenshot to a secure, wireless printer. I printed 5 copies on heavy, high-quality cardstock. I slipped the documents into a sleek, black leather portfolio. I was not going to skip the Sunday dinner. I was going to attend, and I was going to burn the entire corporate worship service to the ground. Sunday evening arrived with a bitter, freezing wind that stripped the last of the autumn leaves from the trees. I dressed meticulously for the occasion. I did not wear the modest, unassuming sweaters I usually wore to blend into the background of Eleanor's pristine home. I wore a tailored, slate-gray designer suit, incredibly sharp black heels, and a minimalist gold necklace. I looked exactly like what I was, a chief executive officer. Marcus barely noticed. He was entirely consumed by his own impending humiliation, rehearsing the speech he was going to give his father about the lost promotion. We drove in silence to my in-laws' sprawling suburban house in the wealthy district. When we arrived, the heavy mahogany front doors swung open before we even rang the bell. Eleanor was waiting, holding a glass of Chardonnay, her eyes immediately scanning Marcus's face for weakness. "Marcus, darling," Eleanor cooed, kissing his cheek. She glanced over his shoulder at me, her gaze sweeping critically down my suit. "Simone, goodness, you are dressed rather formally for a Sunday roast. Did you have a meeting with one of your little suppliers today?" "Something like that, Eleanor," I smiled, stepping past her into the foyer. The dining room was set with expensive china and heavy silver flatware. Richard, the patriarch, was already seated at the head of the table, nursing a scotch. He looked up as we entered, his expression tight. He already knew about the lost promotion. Eleanor had undoubtedly warned him. We took our seats. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. Marcus stared at his empty plate, refusing to make eye contact with his father. For the first 30 minutes of the dinner, the conversation was agonizingly superficial. Eleanor talked about the country club's winter gala. Richard complained about the changing tax codes. I sat quietly, cutting my roasted chicken, waiting for the inevitable pivot. When people who are obsessed with status experience a failure, they cannot simply process the grief. They have to redirect the narrative. They have to find someone lower on the hierarchy to step on, so they can feel elevated again. Richard finished his scotch, set the heavy crystal glass onto the table with a loud clink, and turned his gaze directly to me. "So, Simone," Richard boomed, his voice carrying the aggressive, interrogating tone he used on junior loan officers at his bank. "Marcus tells me the e-commerce market is experiencing a bit of a downturn this quarter. How is the little lotion business holding up? Are you still operating out of that warehouse, or have you finally decided to pack it in and get a real job?" Marcus flinched. He looked at me, a silent, desperate plea in his eyes, begging me to take the hit quietly so the attention would remain off of him. "The business is operating exactly as I planned, Richard," I replied smoothly, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water. "The warehouse is fully staffed, and our Q4 projections are quite solid." Eleanor let out a sharp, condescending laugh, dabbing her mouth with a linen napkin. "Projections, that is such a cute word, Simone. But projections do not pay the mortgage, do they? It has been 8 years. 8 years of playing entrepreneur. You really have to look at the reality of the situation. Marcus has been carrying the heavy financial burden of this marriage for entirely too long." She turned to Marcus, her voice softening into a sickly sweet maternal purr. "Marcus works so hard at his firm. He puts in the long hours. And yes, sometimes corporate politics are unfair, and promotions are given to the wrong people, but at least he is in the game. At least he brings home a steady, reliable paycheck. You really should be more grateful for the stability he provides you, Simone." It was a masterclass in passive-aggressive manipulation. She was simultaneously comforting Marcus for his failure and utilizing my failure to make him feel superior. "I am incredibly grateful for the stability we have in our home, Eleanor," I said quietly, setting my fork down perfectly parallel to my knife. "Well, you should be," Richard snapped, leaning forward, eager to twist the knife further. "Because let us be brutally honest here, Simone. You are 35 years old. You have no corporate resume. If your little soap company goes bankrupt tomorrow, you have absolutely nothing to fall back on. You would be completely destitute without the safety net Marcus built for you. It is incredibly selfish of you to keep indulging this fantasy while he shoulders all the real responsibility. The sheer, staggering audacity of the lecture hung heavy in the air over the roasted chicken. They truly believed it. They had spent 8 years convincing themselves that I was a financial parasite, a delusional woman draining their son's resources. They had never once asked to see my business plan. They had never once asked to see my balance sheets. They had simply looked at the fact that I did not wear a corporate badge, and they had written me off as a failure. I looked at Marcus. My husband was sitting there, listening to his parents verbally annihilate my character, my intelligence, and my work ethic. He was listening to them call me a selfish parasite, and he said absolutely nothing. He took a bite of his potatoes. He let the insult hang in the air, accepting it as the price of admission for avoiding his own uncomfortable conversation about the lost promotion. He was throwing me to the wolves to save his own skin. In my profession, when you are negotiating a multi-million-dollar contract, you never reveal your leverage until the opposing party has completely committed to their false position. You let them build their argument on quicksand, and then you simply remove the foundation. I reached down to the floor, unlatched the brass clasp of my black leather portfolio, and pulled out the 5 heavy cardstock prints. You bring up a very valid point regarding financial transparency, Richard, I said, my voice dropping the polite, deferential tone I had used for 8 years. I spoke with the crisp, absolute authority of a chief executive officer taking control of a boardroom. The sudden shift in my cadence caused the entire table to freeze. Eleanor's wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Richard frowned, his heavy eyebrows pulling together in confusion. Marcus looked up, a flicker of genuine panic crossing his face. Since we are discussing the heavy financial burdens of this marriage, I continued, pacing my words flawlessly, I think it is only fair that we conduct a complete, accurate audit of the household income. I took the first cardstock print and slid it across the polished mahogany table until it stopped directly in front of Richard's empty Scotch glass. I took the second print and handed it to Eleanor. I took the third print and placed it directly on top of Marcus's plate. "What is this?" Richard demanded, picking up the paper. He adjusted his reading glasses, his eyes scanning the document. "That, Richard," I explained, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms, "is a certified screenshot of my corporate banking application, time-stamped 48 hours ago." The dining room went dead silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Richard stared at the paper. His mouth opened slightly. The aggressive, bullying patriarch vanished instantly, replaced by a bank executive trying to process a number that fundamentally broke his reality. This is a wire transfer," Richard whispered, his voice trembling. He looked up at me, his face draining of color. $2.4 million. Eleanor gasped, dropping the paper onto the table as if it had burned her fingers. 2 million? Simone, what is this? Is this a joke? Did you doctor a bank statement? Marcus picked up his copy. He stared at the numbers. The zeros stretched across the page, undeniable, heavy, and absolute. "It is not a joke, Eleanor," I said smoothly. "Last week, I finalized a massive, exclusive retail distribution contract with an international cosmetics conglomerate. That wire transfer is the initial purchase order to stock their flagship stores for the holiday season. They bought my inventory. They did not buy the company. I still own 100% of the equity." Marcus looked at me, his eyes wide with absolute, primal shock. "Simone, $2 million. In cash, you made $2 million. "Yes, Marcus," I said, locking eyes with my husband. "In cash, not stock options. Not a promised year-end bonus that might get slashed by a middle manager. $2.4 million, sitting in a liquid account, generated entirely by the little lotion hobby your father has spent 8 years mocking." The silence returned, heavier and more suffocating than before. I looked at Richard, the man who had just called me destitute, the man who had just told me I would be nothing without his son's safety net. "You were concerned about my resume, Richard," I said quietly. "Let us compare resumes." Your son works 60 hours a week for a massive corporation that just passed him over for a promotion and handed him a miserable $3,000 bonus. I work for myself. I built a supply chain from the ground up. I manage 15 employees. And in a single afternoon, I generated more liquid cash than you and your son have earned in your entire combined corporate careers. Richard's face flushed a deep, mottled red. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The sheer, overwhelming mathematics of the situation rendered him completely mute. You cannot argue with $2.4 million. Eleanor, desperate to salvage the rapidly collapsing hierarchy, immediately deployed her only remaining tactic, fake, aggressive joy. "Well," Eleanor shrieked, forcing a wide, terrifyingly artificial smile. "Oh my goodness, Simone. This is incredible news. Why did you not tell us? This changes everything. Marcus, your wife is a millionaire. You two can finally buy that massive house in the gated community. You can upgrade his car. Oh, this is wonderful for the family." I looked at Eleanor. I watched the greed instantly overwrite her disdain. In a matter of seconds, she had gone from calling me a parasite to eagerly planning how she could spend the money I had earned. She believed that because I was married to her son, my success was communal property. "It does not change everything, Eleanor," I corrected her, my voice turning incredibly cold. "It changes absolutely nothing for Marcus, because Marcus and I signed a post-nuptial agreement 1 month before our wedding." Marcus froze. The blood completely left his face. He remembered the document he had forced me to sign to protect his precious corporate salary from my failing business. "The post-nuptial agreement is ironclad," I explained to the room, pulling a folded copy of the legal document from my portfolio and dropping it onto the table. "It explicitly mandates that our finances, our businesses, and our investments remain entirely, legally separate. Marcus wanted to ensure he was completely insulated from my business. He walled himself off." I looked directly at my husband. "You got exactly what you asked for, Marcus," I told him, my voice devoid of any pity. "You are completely insulated from my business. My company, my equity, and my $2.4 million belong entirely to me. You do not get a single dime." Marcus stared at me, his jaw unhinged. The realization of what he had done to himself, the monumental, catastrophic financial error he had made out of sheer arrogance, crashed down on him like a physical blow. "Simone, please," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. That was 8 years ago. We were young. I was just trying to be financially responsible. We are married. We are partners. We can tear that contract up." "We are not partners, Marcus," I said quietly, slicing through his pathetic bargaining. "Partners defend each other. Partners support each other when they are building the foundation. You sat at this table for 8 years and listened to your parents call me a parasite, and you never said a single word. You only want to be my partner now because the building is finished and you want the penthouse suite." I stood up from the dining table. I picked up my portfolio. "You wanted a traditional corporate marriage where you carried the heavy financial burden, Marcus," I said, looking down at him. "Congratulations, you have one. Enjoy your $3,000 bonus." I turned my back on the table. I did not look at Richard, who was staring at the bank statement in absolute defeat. I did not look at Eleanor, whose fake smile had completely collapsed into a mask of pure horror. I walked out of the dining room, down the long hallway, and out the heavy mahogany front doors. I left them sitting in the wreckage of their own arrogance, staring at the exact price tag of their cruelty. I stepped into the freezing November night and walked to my car. I did not drive back to the house Marcus, and I shared. I had anticipated exactly how the evening would end, and I am a woman who plans for every single logistical contingency. Earlier that afternoon, I had instructed my executive assistant to book a luxury suite at a 5-star hotel in the center of the financial district, using my corporate account. I had already moved my most important personal documents, my jewelry, and a week's worth of clothing into the suite. I drove to the hotel, handed my keys to the valet, and rode the private elevator up to the top floor. The moment I stepped into the suite and closed the door, my cell phone began to vibrate. It buzzed once, twice, 10 times in rapid, frantic succession. The screen illuminated with a relentless stream of text messages from Marcus. "Simone, where are you? You cannot just drop a bomb like that and leave. Please come home. We need to talk about this like adults. My parents are in shock. You really humiliated my father. But I told them we are a team and we are going to figure this out. Simone, that contract was signed 8 years ago. It was just a precaution. We are married. I love you. Please answer the phone." I read the messages while pouring myself a glass of sparkling water from the minibar. I did not feel an ounce of pity. In chemistry, when you introduce a highly reactive catalyst to an unstable compound, the resulting explosion is not a tragedy. It is simply the unavoidable law of thermodynamics. Marcus was an incredibly weak, unstable compound. The $2,400,000 was the catalyst. He was detonating exactly as science dictated he would. I did not reply. I placed the phone on silent, turned off the lights, and slept for 9 uninterrupted hours in a massive, perfectly quiet king-sized bed. The next morning, the dismantling of my marriage officially commenced. At exactly 9 o'clock, I sat in the glass-walled conference room of a premier corporate litigation firm. Sitting across from me was a senior partner named Catherine. Catherine was a brilliant, ruthless attorney who specialized in protecting high-net-worth founders during hostile divorces. I slid the original, notarized copy of the post-nuptial agreement across the table, along with the corporate banking statements and the retail acquisition contract. "My husband forced me to sign this contract 1 month before our wedding," I explained, my voice completely objective. "He wanted absolute, legally binding protection from my business liabilities. I need you to ensure that this document now provides me with absolute, legally binding protection from his greed." Catherine adjusted her glasses and read through the contract. As her eyes scanned the dense legal paragraphs, a slow, dark, highly appreciative smile spread across her face. "Simone," Catherine drawled, leaning back in her leather chair, "I have reviewed hundreds of marital contracts in my career. I have rarely seen one drafted with such aggressive, paranoid hostility toward a spouse. Your husband's lawyer designed this to build an impenetrable fortress around his assets." "Is it enforceable?" I asked. "It is perfectly enforceable," Catherine confirmed, tapping the heavy paper. "He explicitly mandated that all business entities, intellectual property, and revenue generated by either party remain entirely segregated. He specifically waived his right to any equity, past, present, or future in your skincare brand. In his desperate attempt to ensure he would never have to pay for your failures, he legally locked himself out of your success. It is a masterpiece of self-sabotage. There is one variable," I noted, pointing to the second page. "The joint checking account. We contributed proportionately to household expenses. Will he attempt to claim that marital funds were commingled to support the business?" "He will absolutely attempt it," Catherine said, her eyes narrowing with predatory anticipation. "When a man realizes he just missed out on millions of dollars, he will hire the most aggressive bulldog attorney he can find to try and pierce the corporate veil. We need to ensure your accounting is flawless." "My accounting," I said quietly, "is a fortress. Every single raw material, every shipping box, and every employee's salary has been paid exclusively through my segregated corporate accounts. I have never used a single dime of our joint household money for my company. I knew the rules of his game, Catherine, and I played them flawlessly." "Excellent," Catherine said, closing the file. "I will file the petition for the dissolution of the marriage this afternoon. We will serve him at his office." I left the law firm and drove to my manufacturing facility. When I arrived, the warehouse was a hive of controlled, beautiful chaos. Forklifts were moving pallets of packaged serums. My employees were executing the massive retail order with absolute precision. This was the empire I had built with my own 2 hands, late at night, while my husband was sleeping, completely unbothered by my exhaustion. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my security detail called my office extension. "Miss Simone," the head of security said, "your husband is in the front lobby. He is incredibly agitated. He is demanding to be let through the secure doors." "Do not let him through the secure doors," I instructed smoothly. "I will come down to the lobby." I walked out of my private office and down the staircase to the glass-fronted reception area. Marcus was pacing across the lobby floor. He was wearing his standard gray corporate suit, but his tie was loosened, and his hair was unkempt. When he saw me walk through the double doors, he rushed forward, but the security guard stepped seamlessly between us, holding up a large, unyielding hand. Marcus stopped, looking at the security guard in shock, and then looked at me. "Simone, what is this?" Marcus demanded, his voice cracking with panic. "Security, I am your husband. I called your phone 30 times last night. You never came home." "I am not coming home, Marcus," I said, keeping my distance, standing with perfect posture. "And you cannot be in this facility. This is private corporate property, and you are not an authorized vendor." "Stop talking to me like a business transaction," Marcus shouted, his face flushing red, completely losing his corporate composure in front of my receptionist. "We are married. You cannot just walk away because your company finally made some money. My parents are terrified. My father wants to sit down with you and our financial advisor to discuss how we should manage the capital." The sheer, monumental arrogance of that statement nearly took my breath away. Less than 24 hours after calling me a destitute parasite, Richard wanted to manage my capital. "Your father does not manage my capital," I replied, my voice dropping to a low, lethal volume. "And you do not manage my capital. Because as you so thoroughly explained at dinner last night, you are the sole financial provider of the family, and my business is just a fantasy. I am simply releasing you from the burden of my fantasy." Marcus stared at me, his chest heaving. "You are being vindictive, Simone. I was just stressed about my promotion. I did not mean what I said." "You meant every single word, Marcus," I corrected him. "You meant it for 8 years. You meant it when you forced me to sign that contract. You meant it every Sunday when you let your mother mock my intelligence. You only changed your mind when the wire transfer cleared." I looked at the receptionist. I gave her a small nod. The receptionist reached under her desk and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. She handed it to the security guard, who handed it directly to Marcus. "What is this?" Marcus whispered, staring at the envelope. "Those are the divorce papers, Marcus," I stated clearly. "My lawyer filed them an hour ago. You will find a copy of your precious post-nuptial agreement attached as Exhibit A. Do not ever come to my place of business again. If you do, I will have you arrested for trespassing." I turned my back on him. I walked through the secure double doors, the heavy magnetic locks clicking firmly shut behind me, severing his access to my world permanently. The ensuing legal battle was exactly as brutal, desperate, and pathetic as Catherine had predicted. Marcus, completely unwilling to accept the reality of his own catastrophic mistake, hired a loud, aggressive lawyer who charged him an exorbitant retainer fee. The lawyer immediately filed a motion to invalidate the post-nuptial agreement, claiming that Marcus had signed it under undue stress, and arguing that the sudden, massive valuation of my company constituted an unforeseen change in circumstances that rendered the contract obsolete. It was a laughable, desperate legal fiction. During the mandatory mediation session, we sat in a neutral conference room. Marcus looked exhausted. The stress of the divorce, combined with the humiliation of his stalled corporate career, had visibly aged him. His aggressive lawyer spent 20 minutes delivering a loud, theatrical speech about partnership, marital equity, and how Marcus's emotional support had been the true foundation of my business success. Catherine let the man finish his entire speech without interrupting him once. When he was done, Catherine opened her sleek leather briefcase. She did not raise her voice. She simply began sliding documents across the table. "This is the post-nuptial agreement," Catherine said, tapping the first document. "Drafted by your client's attorney, heavily favoring your client, explicitly waiving all rights to my client's business." She slid a massive, bound ledger across the table. "These are the forensic audits of my client's corporate accounts," Catherine continued, her tone completely merciless. "Certified by an independent accounting firm. They prove unequivocally that absolutely zero marital funds were utilized to scale the business. Your client did not contribute a single dollar to the enterprise." Finally, Catherine slid a small, silver flash drive across the mahogany table. "And this," Catherine said, looking dead into Marcus's eyes, is a compilation of sworn affidavits from 6 different individuals, including family acquaintances and mutual friends, testifying to the fact that your client actively mocked, degraded, and publicly dismissed his wife's business for 8 consecutive years. So, counselor, please do not insult my intelligence by claiming your client provided emotional support to an enterprise he openly despised until the exact day it became profitable. Marcus's lawyer stared at the documents. He looked at the flash drive. He looked at Marcus. The aggressive lawyer realized instantly that his client had lied to him about his level of involvement and the nature of the contract. He knew the case was completely unwinnable. My client will retain his retirement accounts and the equity in the marital home, Marcus's lawyer muttered, rapidly shifting to a defensive retreat. Your client can have the house, his retirement accounts, and his $3,000 bonus, Catherine agreed smoothly, closing her briefcase. And my client retains 100% of her corporate equity and all associated liquid capital. If you attempt to drag this into a public courtroom, I will ensure those affidavits become public record, and your client's professional reputation in the corporate insurance sector will be completely annihilated. Marcus stared at the table. He did not say a word. The realization that he had absolutely no leverage, no legal standing, and no claim to my millions finally broke him completely. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. It was a flawless surgical extraction. The fallout within Marcus's family was a spectacular display of collapsing social hierarchies. Richard and Eleanor, entirely unable to cope with the reality that they had alienated a multimillionaire daughter-in-law, attempted to deploy a pathetic, transparent public relations campaign. Eleanor sent massive, expensive floral arrangements to my corporate headquarters, complete with handwritten notes claiming she had always believed in my vision and begging me to come over for a private dinner to heal the family. I did not throw the flowers in the trash. I instructed my assistant to donate them to a local women's shelter. I placed the handwritten notes into a paper shredder. I never responded to a single one, because Marcus was forced to buy out my half of the equity in our marital home to keep the property. He had to take out a massive secondary loan. Between the new loan payments, the exorbitant legal fees he owed his failed bulldog attorney, and his stagnant salary, Marcus could not afford the house. He was forced to sell the home at a loss. Last I heard through the inevitable corporate grapevine, Marcus had moved back into his childhood bedroom at Richard and Eleanor's house. The 35-year-old golden child, the superior corporate provider, was living under his parents' roof, completely stripped of his arrogant illusion of superiority. The Sunday dinners were no longer celebrations of his mediocrity. They were bitter, quiet gatherings of 3 people trapped in the suffocating reality of their own monumental miscalculation. As for me, I did not just survive the divorce. I achieved absolute, untethered velocity. The initial retail launch of my skincare brand was a massive, unprecedented success. The products sold out in 3 weeks. The international retailer signed a secondary, multi-year distribution contract that tripled the valuation of my company. I expanded my manufacturing facility, hired a world-class executive team, and launched the brand in European markets. I took a portion of my profits and purchased a breathtaking, ultra-modern glass and steel house nestled in the hills overlooking the city. It is surrounded by ancient pine trees, perfectly quiet and utterly secure. I filled my new home with art that I loved, furniture that I chose, and an atmosphere of profound, unshakable peace. There are no condescending lectures in my dining room. There are no fragile male egos requiring constant management. There is only the quiet, beautiful hum of a life built entirely on my own merit. People who hear the story of the Sunday dinner often ask me how I managed to keep my composure for 8 long years. They ask how I did not simply explode, scream at my in-laws, or demand that my husband defend me earlier in the marriage. I tell them the exact same thing I tell young female entrepreneurs when they ask for business advice. When you are building an empire from the ground up, noise is your greatest enemy. If you spend your time screaming at the people who do not believe in you, you are wasting the energy required to mix the concrete. You cannot convince an arrogant person to respect your blueprint. You can only show them the skyscraper once the doors are locked. Marcus and his family wanted me to play the role of the quiet, dependent failure so they could feel large. They demanded a post-nuptial agreement to protect their small, limited kingdom from my ambition. They did not understand that I was not trying to steal their kingdom. I was simply waiting for the ink to dry on the contract so I could legally, permanently exclude them from mine. Silence is not submission. Silence is the laboratory where the explosive is formulated. And when applied with perfect, mathematical patience, success is the most lethal, undeniable revenge in the world. That is my story. If you are listening to this, and you are currently dealing with a partner who demands a safety net while mocking your ambition, or a family that measures your worth entirely by their own narrow corporate metrics, do not cry. Do not beg them to see your value. Just sign the paperwork. Secure your perimeter. Go back to work in the dark, scale your business with absolute precision, and wait for the perfect Sunday dinner to drop the bank statement on the table. If you have ever had to build your success in silence, or if you believe in the absolute, undeniable power of an ironclad post-nuptial agreement, type the word post-nup in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you for tuning in to Family Drama Files. Remember, your ambition is not a hobby, and your peace is a premium asset. Protect it fiercely. Hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one.